2020 Plan Commission and Commission for Citizen Involvement meeting. I'd like to now call the meeting to order. Iris, would you please call the roll?
Beckett.
Here.
Joel is, Commissioner Fisher is excused. Heap.
Here.
Apey.
Here.
Semler.
Here.
Phillip.
Here.
And Kim Whitman is not yet available.
First on the agenda is a citizen comment. This is regarding issues not on the agenda. It's an opportunity to raise issues regarding planning. A time limit of 3 minutes per individual applies. I don't see anyone or have any request for any citizen comment tonight. So we'll move on to the next agenda item. Next on the agenda are the minutes. First are the minutes for February 10th, 2020. I was not at that meeting, so I'll abstain, but I'll entertain any motion, any discussion on the minutes.
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
There's a motion to accept the minutes by Vice Chair Pepe. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Stewart. Again, I'll abstain. All of those in favor of approval?
I'm also
Aye.
abstaining because I wasn't here.
Aye.
Okay, so
Aye.
Commissioner Semler, Commissioner Pepe, Commissioner Stewart, I believe, are all approving. Commissioner Beckett and myself will abstain.
Okay, thank you.
Next are the February 24th, 2020 meeting minutes. Any changes or clarifications for the February 24th, 2020 meeting minutes? None. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion to approve in a second. All those in favor of approving?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? None. Any abstains? None. Approved. Next are the March 9th, 2020 meeting minutes. This is going to be moved to the June 22nd, 2020 meeting. So we'll come back to that at our next Plan Commission meeting. Next on the agenda is the Commission for Citizen Involvement general updates. So we only had one agenda item for tonight, and that or one update for tonight. That was the Palisades Neighborhood Association. They're going to have a general meeting. Sorry, I was going to share the postcard, but I think I'll just announce it. So that was Thursday, June 25th, 2020, from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. It is a virtual meeting via Zoom. You can get more information on the meeting at the Palisades Neighborhood Association website. That's www.palisadesneighborhood.org. On the agenda are comments from the currently acting Vice Chair or Chair. There will be discussion on neighborhood grants, traffic, revisions to the P&A bylaws, and comments and discussions. So I encourage everyone in the Palisades Neighborhood Association to attend that virtual meeting, Zoom meeting, on Thursday, June 25th, 2020, from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. That's it. Commissioners, any other comments that commissioners want to make on citizen involvement? None? Right. Next on the agenda, there are findings, conclusions, in order. 6.1, this is the Historic Preservation Community Development Code Amendments, LU 19-0008. Public testimony is not accepted. On March 9th, 2020, the Plan Commission made a preliminary recommendation that the City Council approve the proposed code amendments and directed staff to return with draft findings, conclusions, and order. The staff coordinator is Paul Espe, associate planner. Director Siegel, is there any comments that you wish to make on the Historic Preservation Community Development Code amendments?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Commissioners, any comments for approving the findings and conclusions in order? None. Is there a motion to approve?
I move so.
Commissioner Bucket moves for approval of the Historic Preservation Community Development Code Amendments LU 19-0008. For a second.
Second.
Vice Chair Pepe seconds. Iris, would you please call the roll?
Beckett,
Is this a vote on it?
Yes, for approval.
Okay, yes.
Eep,
Yes.
Pepe,
Yes.
Semler,
Yes.
Stewart,
Yes.
Whitman. Okay, that's an affirmative.
Next on the agenda is a work session. A time limit of 5 minutes per individual applies. To provide comments, suggested that folks email Iris, and we did receive 2 requests for comments. So I'll open it up for public discussion after we have the staff report, and I'll announce when the public comment session is open. So this is agenda item 7.1, the Community Development Code amendments related to seasonal outdoor dining enclosures. This is work session number 1, PP 20-0001. The Commission will see an update and provide input on potential amendments to the Community Development Code to ease regulatory barriers for seasonal outdoor dining enclosures. The staff coordinator is Evan Cranstead, associate planner. Evan, would you like to give us an update on the Community Development Code for seasonal outdoor dining enclosures? Sorry, Evan, I think you want to unmute. No, we can't hear you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
We can hear you now.
All right, great. Yes, I'll share my presentation here and get started. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. For the record, my name is Evan Franstead. I'm associate planner with Planning Department. And this is for the seasonal outdoor dining enclosures. So this project began with a pre-application meeting that we had in November for Chuckie Pies and Bamboo Sushi at the Windward site. They're proposing 2 outdoor dining enclosures. It's currently, there's outdoor seating right now, and they want to enclose those during the winter months. And during that review, it was discovered that the DRD standards probably did not allow for these, especially they prohibit vinyl materials. And it required minor development design review and would be a modification to the Windward site. And the applicants generally thought that was very restrictive and took too much time, and they didn't agree with the process. So they requested that we look at the code and see what we can do about code amendments. And that's why we're here tonight. After that, we, Scott presented this to the Planning Commission in January, and you directed us to move forward with it. So we reached out to the affected neighborhood associations and restaurant owners. I basically reached out to any restaurant owner with outdoor dining, and we held 2 focus groups, one with restaurant owners and business owners who have buildings with restaurants in it, and to the affected neighborhood associations. So those happened in February, and we were supposed to have this work session a while ago, but now here we are tonight. And the purpose of this is to review public input, refine the scope, and hopefully provide direction to draft code amendments. So the current parameters is what we have set up, just to be clear, because there's been public comments submitted, and it can be, and this is all in a discussion form right now, but what we have at the moment is these outdoor dining enclosures would be installed in November through April and then taken down, completely removed, where the existing outdoor seating would remain. These would be located on private property, not within the public right-of-way. They would be located on the ground floor, so this does not apply to upper stories or rooftops. The idea there was that the ground floor would help activate the outdoor area in the wintertime, either public or private, and that the upper floors and rooftops would not do that. And just to be clear, standard building code and fire code does apply. We don't have any authority to change those. I know some of the restaurant owners would like us to, especially the requirement for sprinklers for these, but that's really up to the fire marshal, and we can't do that here. All right, so to give a brief summary of the focus group with the restaurant owners, they felt that these enclosures are generally necessary to meet customer demand and to remain viable in colder months when they say business is slower. The idea that they expressed was that people want to be outside anyway. They especially wanted to bring their dogs, but that wasn't the only reason. That people just like these enclosures, and that it's kind of just an ongoing demand that they can't meet with our current code. They did say that the appearance and design should match the existing building. They were fine with design standards for that, generally. They didn't think parking was going to be an issue because parking is generally, well, business is slower in the winter, is what they explained, and there's less parking anyway. And these would increase parking, and I don't think that's an issue. They also mentioned that we should consider vestibules. So those are the comfort entrances that look very similar to these, and that would be helpful in the wintertime as well. So moving along here, the neighborhood associations, they were generally opposed to amending the code, with the exception of one person. They felt that there's already a review process in place, even though it might require a design variance or looking at design standards, and it's a fairly long process. They felt like that was what is already in place, and that's what should be in place. And I should mention that Waluga neighborhood, they submitted a letter that you were emailed today, and that should be submitted into the record. If you had a chance to read that letter, that's very indicative of what we were told at the focus group. Generally, they like what the process is in place. They don't think we should change it. They were worried that the enclosures might cover up the design of the existing building, which, if you talk about the Windward site, there was extensive public hearings and public review process, which neighborhoods commented on, and to add anything that appears to be permanent, even though it would be up for 6 months of the year, wouldn't be in keeping with the general process for that building. And almost everybody except for one person was opposed to vinyl windows. They were very opposed to vinyl windows. Some went on to say that vinyl is a toxic material, and they just don't like the look of them. They look cheap. So yeah, they did not like vinyl windows, which is the standard material for these enclosures. That's what the windows are made of. There's really no other material available. You can't really put glass in these because it's canvas. So that's really about the only option they have for these. Neighborhoods also felt that this would increase parking demand, which would have negative impacts on surrounding neighborhoods. And that's what Beluga neighborhood, their letter talked about as well. So we can go over that letter. Yeah, like I said, it's very indicative of what they discussed with us. So in my memo that is dated on May 29th, we laid out 4 different options for code amendments. These aren't the only options. There are other things that we could do, but I thought these were good examples of what's possible. And you could do a combination of these, but the first one is basically just requiring a building permit. This is a ministerial review. It would require us to draft code standards that are clear and objective. So no interpretation would be necessary. You would have to be very clear about limitations on size, height, materials, colors, all that. The benefit to this is it reduces costs and permitting time for the applicant. And they can just go into the building department, submit their building plans. They don't need to go through land use review, no public hearings, nothing like that. And building permits in general are fairly quick to review and easy to implement because they are clear and objective standards. Compared to writing a staff report and having a public hearing, building permits are faster. The negative, I guess the downfall to having this process is that it is hard to truly craft clear and objective standards when you're talking about compatibility with an existing structure or design standards in general. This limits the flexibility for different designs in siting situations. If you have a creative architect that wants something beyond the standard design that may match the building, this might not be allowed with the standard building permit clear and objective standards. It establishes uniform standards for temporary structures, which may degrade the look of the design district or the existing building. It's kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, which might not be compatible with the existing building. And it does not allow for public comment or staff discretion in requiring modifications. So the neighborhoods would not be able to submit comments. There's no appeal process. Moving on to option number 2. This is a minor development design review, but would require only limited standards. Would not require a hearing unless it was appealed, which is standard for minor development, which could streamline the process. So the idea here would be to not really get around, but not require everything that the overlays require. So the DRD and the Lake Road Village Center prohibit vinyl materials. If we had specific standards that applied only to these seasonal outdoor dining enclosures, that wouldn't be an issue. The minor development process, it requires public notice and opportunity to comment and appeal for the neighborhoods or anybody that might be opposed. Like I said, no DRC hearing unless it's appealed. This will save time and streamline the process. Design overlays will not be applicable, which will reduce code conflicts. Only certain commercial design standards would apply. I think we could work with what we have now. There's some that talk about that additions or remodels have to be complementary to the existing building. I think that would be a good fit for this. This would still allow flexibility and for a variety of design situations and siting situations. The negative is that this would allow vinyl windows, which some feel is cheaper and could become incompatible with existing structure. It is a longer review time compared to the building permit ministerial option. And option number 3 would be to use the use-specific standard section of the code to apply only for this use. This is a minor development process. There's also this could also be with no DRC hearing unless it's appealed. The positives to this is it's very specific to seasonal enclosures. You could create simple code implementation with just a link from the use table. Allows certainty for applicants and neighborhood with specific standards. There wouldn't be a whole lot of ambiguity if it was written properly to what is required, and applicants do like that. They want to know what the standards are and what they need to do. Clear direction is always appreciated. It's been my experience with working with applicants. This ensures public notice and opportunity to comment and appeal if anybody is opposed. The negatives are it includes putting design standards in use specific section of the code, which is a little bit awkward. It would also allow vinyl windows, which some do not support because they can be incompatible, like I said before. It does require a longer review time with the notice process and land use review and higher fees compared to building permits. Now, number 4 would be just to amend the DRD building design standards that prohibit the vinyl materials. So far, we only have 2 proposed enclosures, which are in the DRD. So this would fix that. It would get to where it would be a simpler process for the applicants that have submitted plans. So the only proposed restaurants, it would fix all of that. But the downfall is that with the focus group, with the restaurant owners, there was some interest in doing this in the future, but they didn't have immediate plans. So maybe not next year, but maybe 2 or 3 years from now, other restaurants in different zones and overlays will want to do the same thing and want to go back and want to change the code for them potentially, if we don't just want it to be in the DRD. This would also allow vinyl windows, which again, some are not in favor of, and it has the same longer review time with the land use review and higher fees. So some key questions for the commission that I had was, do you want to move forward with this project and start looking at drafting code amendments? Is there a preferred option or a combination of the options that were presented? Should additional parking be required? And should we consider vegetables to be added to the scope of the review? And a tentative timeline, we were hoping to get this project done for the fall so they can install these in time for the winter. If we move forward, we could potentially have draft code amendments for the July 27th Planning Commission hearing. And this would be allowed, this would get us to adoption of findings and hopefully to City Council hearing on September 1st, adoption of findings by City Council on September 15th, and the ordinance would be effective on October 15th. And this would allow them, well, it depends on which option you go with, but they could potentially still put these in for next winter. So that concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Evan. Commissioners, questions for Evan? Commissioner Stewart?
All right, I was just checking to make sure I was turned on here. In the downtown area, where is the generally where's the right of way line, or where's the public private line? Is that behind the sidewalk or is it at the curb?
Generally, it varies from property to property, but yeah, generally behind the sidewalk.
Okay, so basically,
yeah.
Okay, so there are a lot of facades on the buildings downtown that are basically on the property line. So these types of enclosures, as you know, as you're saying, they're not allowed on the right of way, would not be able to be built along the street, essentially.
That's correct. Yeah, some restaurants that couldn't follow these because it would be in the right of way.
Another question I have, in your research, have you looked at the codes of other jurisdictions that might have similar language for these sorts of structures, and were you able to glean anything from those?
No, we haven't done that yet. I think that's probably the next step, along with looking, once we determine the scope, we would look at, what other jurisdictions are doing, if there's anything similar. And also we need to look at, excuse me, we would need to look at the comprehensive plan and neighborhood plans and overlay district plans to see if they're compatible or they meet the policies in those plans. So there's a lot more work to do on this if we decide to move forward, and depending on what the scope is.
So then the last question I have then is with regards to vinyl windows and vinyl materials, and I'm guessing we're going to get into this a little bit more as we discuss, but I was looking through the code, and albeit not thoroughly by any means, but I saw basically prohibited materials being listed as vinyl windows and vinyl siding in certain places. But as far as vinyl as a material, I didn't see that any place. Is there somewhere in the code that actually prohibits other types of vinyl, or are we just talking about windows and siding?
The DRD and the Lake Road Village Center overlay do not allow vinyl as a material.
Okay. All right.
I have a question.
Hmm?
The,
Sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Beckett, and then I'll take a question from Vice Chair Pape after that.
say that again?
Go ahead, Commissioner Beckett, I'm just acknowledging you, and then we'll give the floor to Vice Chair Pape after that. Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Beckett.
Okay, so I'm going first. Okay. Your voice is hard for me to understand. Any rate, if any one of these options is implemented, would it be the same option both in the downtown area and in the Lake Grove area? One more strident opposition to this that I read had to do with the Lake Grove area. So I want to see whether we have one code that would fit both sides of the city or not.
Well, I think that's something that we need to determine. It could be that it just applies to the downtown area, or it could be citywide to any commercial zone.
Vice Chair Pepe.
So bringing this back to maybe for me, back up to a 40,000, 50,000 foot level, reading the comments from the focus groups, it sounds like they're wanting this because in the winter months it's slower, yet they need more space for customers. To me, if you were to take the current situation in the pandemic and needing a 6-foot separation with restaurants, if you were to take that aside, that doesn't hold a whole lot of water to me, that if in the slower months you need larger capacity. If we were to take into account the current situation where if restaurants are to be able to open up and they need to have, what is it, 6 feet or 10 feet, whatever that distance is between tables or between party sizes within the restaurant, then this might be an option that we need to really look at and allow, especially during this time frame, so that our local restaurants and eateries can survive. The other question that I have is, would this extend to retail businesses as well? Or are we just looking at this for eateries, places where you can go and sit down and eat?
Okay, so let me make sure I understand the first question. You wanted to know if, because even though they say it's slower in the winter, why would they need these?
It wasn't necessarily a question, it was more of a comment of,
All right.
that to me is, that doesn't hold water. Why would you need a larger space when you're slower?
Sure.
You want to reduce staff, you want to reduce your square footage. That to me doesn't hold water. So that was more of a comment. Really the question was, or something for the commission to think about, is when this started and it was brought forth, this pandemic really was not visible to us. Now it is, and we're seeing the ramifications of that. And this might be, with the requirement of needing additional space, an option to allow our local restaurants, local businesses, additional help to hopefully survive and not shut down. And then so the question really is, would it also extend to retail or other business?
The scope of the project right now is just for restaurants. So it would not apply to retail.
Okay.
But part of the reason that we're here is to get direction on scope. So that's, I think we're open to your feedback on that.
Okay.
Commissioner Sunlight?
I was just wondering that, you've given this criteria of November to April as a window for these structures to be erected in place. And as part of that, would there be anything written in the code for violations, for people leaving them up longer, for fines, things like that, ramifications for people being out of line or not following the rules after code has been written and these things have been erected?
Yeah, if the standards require them to remove them in May or at the end of April, and they don't do that, then yes, it would be a code enforcement case. I mean, depends if it's just a building permit or if it's land use. But yes, there's already systems in place to enforce violations.
Yeah, there is a code section already, 5009, that deals with enforcement and violations. So any violation of development code is subject to fines up to $1,000 a day, would be a continuing violation. That's normally assessed, of course, on the initial violation, but any violation is subject to fines.
Gotcha. Okay, I was just wondering if there was consequences and how strict they would be. I think it's in the best interest for any restaurant who wants these to be compliant, but just wondering. Thank you.
Maybe a comment and a question to Vice Chair Pepe's comments. I kind of thought about the same thing too. Is maybe it might be at odds with the goals. If the season is slow, then why do you need more space? But I could say that the place where I saw this nicely done was down in Orlando, Florida, along International Drive. It was part of the redevelopment of that area that they did called Icon Park. And they had very similar vinyl type of enclosures. They had it out in the winter. I was actually there in February. And it's a really booming area. So there was lots of noise, lots of activity. The restaurant inside was kind of loud. And some people just like to go into the enclosure area to maybe it might be a little bit quieter, or they like to look at the other activities, the Ferris wheel, and some of the other stuff that was out there. But I thought it was fairly nicely done. And from looking at the pictures and some of the drawings that we had from our proposals, it looked very similar. But one question I had, Evan, was when we talk about time frames, I think one of the motivating factors to look at updating our code is to make it a more efficient and faster process. Do you give any feel for how long does it take today, and then how much faster would we get in the process through kind of the proposed options? I mean, maybe we don't have to go to every option, but how long does it take today, and what's the fastest that we're imagining that we could do it?
So with what was proposed in the DRD for Bamboo Sushi and Chuckie Pies, that's a 3 to 4 month process once it's complete. Usually applications are incomplete first and they have to submit new materials. I mean, more realistically, you're talking about 4 to 6 months. And that's with the caveat that they'd be applying for design variances, which they might not get approval for. And you're talking about a DRC hearing where the DRC may not feel they meet the criteria in a variety of different ways. They're not easy criteria to meet. So it's just a lot of questions. It's uncertain to them if they even get approval. So it's not just the time, the overall length of review process, it's the uncertainty that they get approved.
Vice Chair Pepe?
If they were to go through that process and they receive approval, would it just be for a specific amount of time, or could we look at that? And if so, could we look at that as an option? They go through the process, they get approved, and now they're okay going forward, so long as it stays with the same construction materials look year after year after year. And then maybe there's a sunset period of 5 years. It needs to come up again for review, or?
Yeah, with any land use application in minor development, you can have conditions of approval, and you could set a time frame for some of that. You need to link it to a requirement, but yes, that's possible.
Yeah, and
Do you see any downsides to that?
Scott, do you want to go ahead?
The only thing I was going to add is that currently there is an expiration date on land use approvals that if the applicant doesn't exercise their right with that permit within, I think, 3 years,
Right.
then the permit expires. So we probably want to keep that in place, because if the standards were to change, after some amount of time, probably ought to go back through the process. But I think your point, Commissioner Pappy, is once you receive that permit, that entitlement, and you know that it's going to be a recurring event, that make that an entitlement going forward for some period of time. I think we can look at that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, absent a sunset provision in your use standards, that would be, you'd grant a permit, and that would be like any other permit for a permanent structure. So it continues as year after year. It's just that they have to remove it for the requisite period of time. But it doesn't start over. It's not like the permit starts over every year. They have a right to then do that every year between November and April. Unless there's a provision that says, the permit only exists for, say, 3 years. And if you're going to do that, I think it should be in the code itself, because the limitation right now in the code is if you don't use the permit within the 3-year period of time, it expires. Well, once they put it up, they're using it per the plan, November through April. So that would continue on.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other comments, or we can move to public comment? No other comments. So,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
the only thing I would want to just remind the commission that we're not making a decision on the merits, and we're not asking the people to testify as to, we're not going to be adopting anything tonight. The question to the commission is what code amendment or amendments framework should go forward for purposes of putting together a public comment for a public hearing. So what do you want people to testify to? I mean, you could have 1 or 2 or 3 different options. So.
Thank you, Attorney Boone, for the clarification. So with that, Iris, I'd like to open it up for public comment. Again, we will have time limit, I believe, for this. Iris, would you like to call our first member for public comment?
Certainly, Carol Ockert. Welcome.
Welcome, Carol. Hopefully you can hear us. Would you like to state your name and address for the record and then give us your public comments? Carol, you're on mute. If you'd like to unmute, you can go ahead and give public comment. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm sorry, was that me? Am I up?
Yes, you're up. So please state your name and address and the organization you represent, and then go ahead. Address for the record, and then give us your public comments.
All right, great. Well, hello. My name is Carol Ockert.
You're on mute. If you'd like to unmute, you can go ahead and give public comment.
I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think if you have YouTube, anyone playing in the background or any other audio, please. The organization you represent. We're only hearing Carol speak.
All right, great. Well, hello. My name is Carol Ockert. Hi, did I fix it?
If you've muted your other audio, I think you have. Go ahead, Carol. Sorry.
All right, I'm very sorry about that. Sorry for that problem. Hi, Carol Ockert, and I'm here speaking tonight. I'm from the First Edition Neighbors and Forest Hills Neighborhood Association. And I have 3 points that I'd like to cover this evening. Number 1, one person in the neighborhood focus group was listed as in favor. Miles is one of our board members. I reached out to him prior to the focus group because Miles is the owner of the new 3rd and B project. I wanted to understand his perspective, and I learned that he had not been part of the restaurant owner focus group. So I invited him to the neighborhood association group. I think it's better to have a diversity of discussion around the table, business owners and neighborhood residents at the same table at the same time, listening to the perspective of others. It can help us get to collaborative solutions. Commissioner Pape may remember that the neighborhood folks have been advocating for shared group discussion. Miles provided good information, like the potential complication of fire code and the danger of heaters in a temporary structure. Number two, next month, the North Anchor developer will be participating in the now Zooming Fan Forest Hills board meeting. Parking will be a discussion topic. Building design will be a discussion topic. These temporary enclosure proposals could allow the North Anchor developer to design a restaurant with a very small permanent footprint and a very large 6-month temporary enclosure footprint, and do an end run around Lake Oswego's parking code. When we look at the design for North Anchor, if a 6-month temporary structure can get around our review process, then Lake Oswego's community-based design review is simply a joke. Number three, I have to remind you that establishing the design and mass of the Windward project was a grueling process that tore this community apart. A large part of the compromise to deal with the mass of the buildings was the large open public alleys. That was the sell to the community, both the visual and the actual space between the buildings. This proposal would allow that ground space and visual space to be obscured at least half of the year, not requiring a public development review commission process undermines what was a hard-earned community compromise and would undo community trust. In summary, any approach or solution that helps restaurants adapt their business model needs to utilize the current Development Review Commission process, but not in the adversarial mode using the appeal structure that staff suggested, where we only go to DRC under a contentious appeal. Our current DRC process encourages applicants and the neighborhoods to sit down at the same table early in the process and get to positive solutions. The community voice is heard through holding true to the current DRC process. The DRC is a commission of people much like yourselves who play an important role. They help us get to good community outcome, to push to streamline, to substitute ministerial staff decisions for inclusive community process inevitably brings poor outcome. Please continue to support our Lake Oswego DRC code process. And I think Commissioner Pape this evening has made a really good suggestion for a way to use that approach and still be something that addresses an ongoing need, that doesn't have to put a particular applicant through a grueling process on an ongoing basis at all. That's just not necessary. So I thank Commissioner Pape for problem solving as we begin this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Questions for Carol? Vice Chair Pape?
Carol, I understand your concern, and what I would like to know is from you and your experience and time within Lake Oswego and the neighborhood associations, with the current health situation that everybody is going through and the requirements for restaurants to have tables X number of feet away from other tables, are you opposed to having outdoor or temporary structures which would then allow at least restaurants to possibly have or seat the same number of guests that they normally would if you rewound 3 to 4 months ago? Or are you opposed to having structures, all additional square footage under temporary structure altogether?
So I'm I'm not taking a position at all that says we're opposed to temporary structures. What I'm opposed to is saying we can streamline the process to vet this with our really understanding the implications. And I think that the DRC process that we currently have absolutely can cope with this, that a restaurant can move through that process, can work with surrounding neighbors and the neighborhood and make it work well for everybody. So I think we have a situation where we can do that. So, and I welcome that opportunity to have that discussion with folks who are trying to, of course, adapt their business model. We're all part of the same community. As neighbors, as residents, as customers, we want them too, and we want them to be viable, but we want to be part of the discussion.
Thank you.
Carol, for clarification, could you summarize the aspects that you took away from Vice Chair Pape's comment that you liked? I just want to make sure I understood that.
Yes, my understanding was that he was suggesting that a business, a restaurant could go through our current DRC process as they're looking ahead to use that particular opportunity to put an additional structure out there, and that they would be able to keep that approval going year to year. And so they wouldn't have to continue to revisit going through that permit process year after year, and that they would be able to project to do it and do it ahead of time.
Thank you, Carol. My understanding from Attorney Boone's comments was that currently, if development application is approved, that remains in effect permanently. That the way the code exists today, there is no year-to-year reapproval that's required. But I think there was also a comment to say that there is a time limit in which you can exercise that approval. Otherwise, it expires. Director Siegel or Attorney Boone, any corrections or comments you'd like to make for that? That looks good. Okay. Commissioners, any comments, questions for Carol? Thank you, Carol. We appreciate you coming into our meeting tonight and giving excellent testimony. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Iris, could we call the next person to comment? I believe that's Jan Castle.
Yes, Jan Castle.
We'll give it a second. It looks like it's connecting to Jan. Jan, I think you may be on mute, or your audio may not be connected. We can't hear you. We just see connecting to audio. We'll give a second for Jan to resolve the audio. Yes. Now it looks like if you want to unmute, I think we should be able to hear you. You're just showing you're muted now.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you now. Welcome, Jan. Andrew.
Okay.
Jan, if you'd like to state your name and address and the organization you represent for the record.
Oh, thank you. My name is Jan Castle. I live at 16181 Perelius Circle in Lake Oswego. I am from the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, although these are my own views and not theirs.
Okay, thank you.
So I would like to address the environmental effects of these enclosures, which we really have not heard about beyond the issue of vinyl, and I'll speak to that too. This community places a high value on sustainability, and the city has led the way in green building with some of its own projects, and it's something that Director Siegel encourages developers to consider when applying to the city. In the case of the Windward, the developer went way beyond code to produce a building that is very energy efficient as well as non-toxic. Therefore, it does not make sense to me to allow tenants there to erect enclosures that not only aren't insulated, but are partially open to the outdoors, and then use precious fuel to basically heat the outdoors. To make this easier to accomplish, encourages other restaurants to do the same thing, which means we would be violating our own community standards throughout the city and negating the progress that has been made by thoughtful developers, the city itself, and all the citizens that work tirelessly to move our community towards a more sustainable way to live. So far, I have not seen an adequate reason to reverse course on our sustainability efforts. The notes from the restaurant owners focus group did not indicate that anyone expected that these enclosures would produce substantially more business for them, but that their clients would simply prefer to be outdoors and to have their dogs with them. Now, I'm a dog person, so I get that. And I have taken my dogs lots of places, but there are limits. We need to expand the lens here beyond just how pleasant that would be to acknowledge the impacts of wasting power unnecessarily. There's a reason that the city has just gone through a long citizen-supported effort to revise the city's sustainability plan to make it the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, which includes an emphasis on green building. We see the devastating destruction produced by weather events in our own state, across the nation, and around the world by a changing climate. We here in LO need to consider the wider picture when making our decisions about how to use energy. We simply are not entitled to waste precious energy resources heating the outdoors so we can have our dogs at our feet. To address the vinyl issue, the production process for vinyl is very damaging to the environment, and being in close proximity to vinyl is toxic to humans and dogs. Vinyl outgasses toxic chemicals, and I'd hate to think how much more it would outgas when heated up by the portable heaters in an enclosed space. And if you're using propane for the heat source, and you're adding in the combustion products of the gas as well, which are called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and of course, as you would expect, they are toxic. People don't think about this when they're enjoying a cozy fire on a cold evening, but it's something that you need to think about on your end before this goes any further. So you need to be thinking about protecting public health as well as the environment in general. So I would urge you not to send the City Council any of these recommendations that make it easier to put up these outdoor enclosures. If a restaurant owner has a specific plan that they want considered, they should go through the whole process. Maybe there's a way to make it work that doesn't endanger the environment or their customers' health. But the options here encourage an unhealthy and environmentally damaging practice that instead should be discouraged. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jan, for your comments. Commissioners, any questions for Jan? Vice Chair Poppy?
In hearing your testimony, I think two questions for you. One, are you opposed to any type of additional outdoor capacity for a business to expand into on a temporary basis?
Not on a temporary basis, but we're talking about ones here that are semi-permanent that would go up every year. I have no objections to all the outdoor seating during the summer. I think that's great. And we have a very long, mild season here. I don't think it's necessary to go through what I've just described in order to have additional seating in the winter.
And I would agree with you regarding the pet situation. I'm not a big fan of going into a restaurant where there's animals and dander and whatnot while we're trying to eat. At the same time, as I mentioned to the previous testimony of Ms. Silbert, currently, right now, they are required to have their tables at a much greater distance, and their capacity is significantly reduced. So as you're asking us to look through at a longer lens and then the environmental impacts and the health impacts, I would also like to see our community look through a longer lens and realize right now restaurants as well as retail establishments are having to significantly curtail the number of guests that they can have in their restaurants to some degree of at least 50% or more. So I haven't come down on one way or another on where I'm standing with this, but I think as a community, we need to have some type of flexibility or allow some flexibility so that our local businesses can continue to thrive and they don't shut down with a national chain coming in who have deeper pockets and can sustain the current situation on a long term. And now we're just no different than pretty much any other city, and we don't have a lot of local business. So I would like to put that out there that everyone's thinking of as well.
I would say that the COVID virus is going to be somewhat of a temporary thing. Eventually, we'll go back to our regular seating kinds of things. I don't see that this is something that an owner would think was a temporary expenditure. These are very expensive, and the only way they could justify that would be to have it up and know that they could have it every year. So it's ultimately a permanent kind of a decision for you to make. It would be helpful, certainly in the short term, but it's really the long term that we need to be thinking of.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions for Jan? Commissioner Summer?
Jan, I would agree with you that these structures are not, thermally great at holding in heat or heating and cooling capacity at that point. But I guess, if something like this were to not be passed and these restaurants weren't allowed to have a structure erected during winter months, would you be opposed to then having heaters out on nice days and cranking it up to make it more accommodating for guests versus having a structure that at least is keeping out wind and rain and having the heaters that they use normally, even during summer months, to keep people comfortable. So I'm just wondering if there's, some give or take there to say, well, yeah, they're not necessarily, thermally great, but we're not using as much fuel or electricity to heat the space to allow people to be there versus, no structure at all.
Well, they do that currently in their outdoor spaces now. I mean, you'll find in the shoulder months that they'll use those heaters, and as you said, sometimes in the summer. So, I mean, we have people from May through September and into October eating outside in some of our establishments that have those heaters. I personally, it kind of grates on me to see us using fossil fuels to heat the outdoors, but I think we've got plenty of options to do that here, and I think it's unnecessary to have to do it in the winter.
Gotcha. And then in terms of going to the vinyl, would you be opposed to just allowing these restaurants to have additional awnings or at least roof covering over these spaces, but avoid any vinyl coverings on the siding from a toxicity standpoint,
well,
to at least allow guests on the exterior more so than they have now? So there would be a bit more protection from the weather, but not necessarily be fully enclosed with the toxic materials that you're
sure. I'm sorry. An awning is. I have no objection to an awning if it meets the design standards for the area. I think that's fine.
Commissioners, any further questions for Jan? Maybe a question related to Jan's question about the outdoor heating. So can someone from staff comment? Would heaters be allowed inside the enclosures, inside the vinyl enclosures, or is that something that's not allowed?
So it's Evan again. The portable heaters, the propane heaters are not allowed within these enclosures. They have to be fire marshal approved. They're attached to the building. So they'll be more efficient than those portable heaters, but yeah, nothing flammable, no flammable material those heaters cannot be under anything flammable, is what he explained to me.
Did any of the business owners express any ideas for heating the enclosures? Did they say they definitely wanted to heat, and they were looking at adding a permanent type of heater to the outdoor structure, or that wasn't discussed yet?
It was discussed. I mean, like I said, the only two restaurants that have plans to do these are Bamboo and Chuckie Pies, and we did discuss it, how much they were going to cost, which is significant. For them, yeah, it would have to be a wall attached to the outside wall, and hooks into the existing sprinkler system. And the heaters can be the same way. So they have to provide sprinklers and a heater. Those two things make these pretty expensive.
Did any of the business owners express any ideas or thoughts about just like leaving the door open and allowing heat from the inside of the building to come out into the outdoor enclosure? Or they were thinking that they would need heat, and it would be a kind of a permanent heater that's attached to the building?
Yeah, during the focus group, I think they all expressed that it would need to be heated.
Okay. So thank you, Jan. Thanks for the excellent testimony tonight. Appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Iris, I don't believe we have any other folks who would like to make public comment tonight.
That's correct.
So at this time, I'd like to close the public comment period for this agenda item. So I think Planner Fenstead had a number of questions that he was looking for feedback from the commission on. Ultimately, it was kind of a direction from the commission to move forward, but also maybe to provide any feedback on the options that were outlined. Planner Fenstead, can you share again the options? Is there a consolidated list of the options that we did?
Yeah, I can pull up my presentation again.
Sure.
I'm still on here.
You can mute yourself. You gotta go over here. Oh. Showing slides.
Mhm.
So, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'll just make sure everyone can see that.
Yes.
Those are the questions.
Yeah. So I think we'll come back to question number one, move forward in draft code amendments. I think we can ask, I'll start with maybe the second question there. Is there a preferred option or combination of options that commissioners feel would be in the interest of the plan commission staff and to get public comment back on? Commissioners, comments on the options? I think from the public testimony that we heard tonight, both in the form of the letter that we received from the Luga Neighborhood Association, and I would like to acknowledge that I think commissioners have spoke out tonight that we did receive that letter, and we did read through it. So thank you to the Luga Neighborhood Association for providing that. But I think some of the comments there was that there was concern about shortening the process to where there wasn't an option for the public to participate in the review and approval for an outdoor structure that business establishment may be wanting to pursue. So some of my feedback was, I think the kind of the option that was the fastest was, clearly shown that it can be very efficient. It's just an outright approval, I think, or with a ministerial approval. But from the public comment, I think that was concerning that there would like to be, more oversight. So I think it was from, the fourth option was to basically keep very close to the way the code is currently to the most efficient option, which is a quick approval without public comment. It'd be somewhere in the middle. So options like 2 or 3 that do allow the public to be involved in the process. Commissioners, any other comments?
I don't know if you can you, this is Philip. I don't know if you can see me or not, but I was sort of thinking along the same lines as you. I think based on public comment and what we've heard and what we've read about in the letters and such. The only thing that I would add, however, is that and I know the 2 case studies that we looked at are both in generally the same place. But there's also the Lake Grove area to consider, as well as the areas kind of to the south of that have potential restaurant use. And so I think the way that development standards or a minor review is basically would be applied, I think needs to be a little bit different for the downtown area as opposed to, say, the Lake Grove area. And I think a little bit higher scrutiny needs to be given to those spaces that have higher visibility. So, for example, the downtown, there's a lot of streetscapes there. Lake Grove has a number of standalone businesses where there's not, where these things could potentially be constructed in areas that are not as easily seen from the public right of way, for example. So maybe the standards in those areas don't need to be as intense, I guess. And that's not to, I'm not trying to belittle the process for certain areas, but simply say that I think sites need to be looked at as not necessarily apples to apples.
Thank you, Commissioner Stewart. Other commissioners, comments?
I think there definitely needs to be, I don't know that we should completely rule out businesses going through a review process. Possibly something, as Chair Heap was suggesting and Commissioner Stewart was suggesting as well, options, some type of an option between 2 and 3. But I would also like to see that this not just be focused and narrowed to restaurants, that if we're going to allow this to be an option, I think especially, I would disagree with some of the testimony today. I don't see the current requirements for distancing relaxing anytime soon. And I think we need to open this up to other retail, other consumer type businesses and allow them an opportunity to fall under whatever is decided amongst us moving forward and putting to the city council.
Commissioners, any other comments? Planner Cranstead, is that helpful? I think what we're hearing from the commission is options 2 and 3 look like options we'd like to get more public comment back on. So, I idea of having public review process is important, and we wouldn't want to have an option that may not include that type of public review process and comment.
Yes, that is helpful. So are you saying that, is there general consensus that option 1 and option 4 are not on the table?
That it might be useful just to run through them one more time. So you
Yeah.
got 1,
Sure.
2, 3, and 4, and then we can get final feedback on the option suggestions from the commission.
Okay, so option 1 was just a building permit. Option 2, minor development that limits design review criteria. Option 3 was a use-specific standard under the use section of the code that's specific to seasonal outdoor enclosures. And option 4 was to change only the DRD prohibited materials list to allow for vinyl windows.
Planner, for instance, if you go back to option number 3, the public review process for option 3 does ensure public notice and opportunity to comment and appeal on the design from the neighborhood association. So, yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Right, options 2 through 4 all have a public notice process. They're all minor development.
Okay. Commissioners, recommendation, I would be in favor of 2 and 3. And 4, I think, is I would have some concerns about just changing the materials and design standards, as was mentioned in the option. Commissioners, any comments?
I would agree. Option 2 and 3.
Yeah, I'm leaning more toward 2 than 3 specifically, but yeah, between the 2, I think is fine.
I agree. I'm some combination of 2 and 3, but I too think 2 is the place to start.
Okay. As a planner for us, I think the commission is recommending that we include options 2 and 3. 1 doesn't seem to have support, and 4, we haven't heard any real comments for 4 either.
Okay.
Thank you for going around and checking with each of the commissioners on that. It's helpful, I think, for us. And a couple other things that we heard that we can look at as we're considering, what type of review process, how specific we need to be in the code with standards. It's just what you were talking about, that there are different contextual problems or situations where, for example, some businesses have outdoor seating currently that's in the back portion of their property, or it's in a side yard, thinking of Lake Grove. Whereas in downtown, most of the spaces are either along the street frontage or they're in a pedestrian easement. So the level of review or the type of review might vary depending on, as you were saying, the exposure and the existing design standards and overlays that are already in place. Because whatever we develop will have to fit well within the existing regulations.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Yeah, I would agree, and hopefully staff, if we move forward, staff would provide some of that, feedback and give the commission options to kind of address some of the issues you're raising. That would be, I think, very interesting to and important for the commission to look at as we try to consider code changes. Planner Francis, could you go back to the list of questions again? I think we've concluded on that. So the next question you had was, should additional parking be required? I'll comment on that. I did listen very carefully to Carol's comments and the neighborhood association comments regarding concerns from parking and the potential or the thought that maybe it could be circumvented, the parking requirements. But that said, I think when we were looking in the options, and if this would go forward in the commission, part of what we'd be looking at are things like, in addition to what was just stated as far as the siting, but also, the size, height that was mentioned earlier. And so I think what I saw in some of the exampled options was, just as an example, size restriction of, I believe it was 400 square feet. The impact from, that we could limit it potentially by, having the code look at restricting the amount of space that would be required as Planner Fenstead was outlining as possible options we could look at. So I think, it's too early to say maybe that additional parking should be required. But we look at it comprehensively as we're looking at the overall requirements, and there could be requirements again that restricts the overall size. So I think at this point it's too early for us to say that additional parking should be required. But if we move forward, we'd be then looking at kind of the comprehensive set of requirements, and then determine if size or other factors were not set in place, and it would open up the opportunity to circumvent parking requirements, then we could look at it. But I think at this point in the process, it's a little bit early, and kind of what staff has outlined that we'll be looking at could address some of those concerns. So I kind of refrain from at this point saying that it should be required until we look at it further and get more information back from staff. Commissioners, any other comments?
Yeah, I would think that, I'm right now leaning towards thinking that additional parking would not be required, for one reason being that in many cases when a temporary structure is constructed, it's basically replacing seating that's already there. And so I don't see the business gaining or losing space for seating in that situation. In fact, when you put a structure up, you actually might lose some space due to the fact that you've got an enclosure there and you need to maintain egress and things like that. The other thing is in the downtown area, for example, where you're talking about multiple mixed use blocks, the parking for a lot of those places is often shared. And so I'm not sure how that would even be codified, so to speak, like how you would track where you would add parking and whose parking it would be. I guess it seems complicated in those areas. I'm not sure how we would even go about enacting something like that.
I would tend to agree with Commissioner Stewart, except for the standpoint for new buildings in the process. If they do, as Ms. Zokert pointed out, start a design and utilize this type of space, whatever that space, whatever that minimum square footage or maximum, whatever is ultimately decided upon. I think for new developments, there could be an issue with parking. For current buildings, I don't see a big issue at all, especially with the two examples that we're talking about right now. But for potential future developments, I could see an issue with parking. But I don't think that's something that should be decided upon right now. I think we need to vet this a little bit further to figure out what size are we going to be able to digest.
Yeah, speaking to the parking issue, I think it's premature. There's no evidence that these businesses will have such a preponderance of winter business that would require additional parking. And back to the other issue of Lake Grove versus downtown, I do think they're separate animals and need to be treated somewhat differently. And particularly, I think the impact of the closures due to the virus will affect a lot of businesses in Lake Grove for probably a couple of years. So philosophically, we should be doing whatever we can to accommodate their growth and recovery, because a lot of them are probably teetering on going out of business now, and vacant businesses are even worse than maybe something that's not quite up to standard for a temporary structure.
Yeah, I would agree
Great.
with the last three commissioners' comments on parking. It's premature, like Stuart said. Most of these spaces have already been allocated in terms of occupancy. People are already going there. Parking spaces have already been allocated. And then in terms of what Commissioner Woodland just said, we should be encouraging the local businesses here to thrive as much as possible during this current pandemic and business environment. I think allowing some flexibility for them.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other on the parking? So, Planner Francis, I think what we heard is that we are sensitive to the comments that the neighborhood association raised regarding parking. So we would like staff to continue to look at aspects that may be related to parking. Not at this point, we're not really saying that it should be required, but the impacts to parking should be considered and should be vetted in our public review process. And if there are concerns where there's some circumvention of the current parking code, and I think the commission would like to understand that. Our direction would be for staff to continue to look at impacts to parking and the parking code.
Let me point out that any comparison between downtown and Lake Grove right now is going to be completely out the window within the next 2 years, because the Lake Grove end of town is being totally rebuilt. The roads, major new buildings, new restaurants. So it's really difficult to try to make any meaningful comparison right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Beckett. Great. So with that, maybe we can move on to the final, or the last bulleted question there. Should vestibules be added to the scope? Planner Francis, I'm not sure how much we talked about vestibules. Can you kind of explain how vestibules would play a part in the temporary enclosures?
Well, they could either, yes, it was a request by the restaurant owners that these vestibules would be an added benefit to their business. I think we've all seen them before. If you want me to describe it, I can, but they're made of the same materials, canvas and vinyl. It adds, can walk in, and it doesn't, try to eliminate the draft that comes in when people open the door to restaurants, and makes the restaurant more pleasurable during the winter. As far as drafting code amendments, I guess they could be tied together, where you refer to both at the same time, and you have to remove them and erect them at the same time, or they could have separate code sections. But it would make sense, because they're so similar and they are seasonal, to have them tied together.
Commissioners, feedback on the request to keep vestibules in the scope of the discussion here for seasonal enclosures?
I guess I have a question. I'm not real clear on, other than being a windbreaker, I see that, but aren't these temporary enclosures typically accessed directly from the restaurant, or are there business owners that are looking to enter them directly from the outside without going through the restaurant? I guess I'm not sure what the function of these really is wanting to be.
Yeah, so the entrance vestibules, you do enter from the outside. That's how you go into the restaurant. And the outdoor dining, there is going to be doors that provide egress. That's fire code. I guess it's up to the restaurant if they want to allow people to go through that door as well. Yeah, the vestibules are for the entranceways.
I guess I would question to staff, how are vestibules commonly being sought after by businesses within Lake Oswego, or?
Well, I think so there were 7 people there at that focus group, and 3 of them talked about it, that they would love to put them on if they were available. But it's the same issues as with the vinyl, and the fact that the code treats them as permanent additions, that it just doesn't make it feasible to go through the process.
I think maybe we need to investigate that a little bit further, because it occurs to me that what they may be talking about or considering is a vestibule on the exterior of the main entry to the restaurant, which in most cases would be on the public right of way, it'd be on the sidewalk, which is really a different situation than what we're talking about here. On the other hand, if they want to put a vestibule internally to the building, there's really no development review. There's no code issue there. So let's see if we can find out some more about that, Evan. If the commissioners are okay with us looking into that further and possibly including it in the scope.
Sure. I mean, I should add, focus group, they were talking about within a site, not on the sidewalk, not on the public right of way. So there's sites that where you can have the entryway that you could add these without going onto the sidewalk. That was what they were describing to me. But
Okay.
yes, we can certainly look into more.
I think Francis, one of the interesting points here is that the vestibules could be totally separate from the outdoor enclosure. Is that correct? That you could add a vestibule for your normal entrance to the business, and then you enter the enclosure through the inside of the restaurant. And so the vestibule doesn't necessarily have to be connected to the enclosure, and that's what they're asking for, is kind of independent vestibules, as well as possibly that it could be connected, but it's both independent and connected, I guess, maybe. And that's what staff would look at for the scope.
Yes, yeah, I think the vestibules in most cases would not be attached to outdoor dining.
Okay.
Things.
Okay. So I think we understand now kind of the recommendations for the options of parking, and the vestibules we'll look at potentially more. So I think now we come back to the question, given the understanding of what it is that the commission would be looking at, is there a direction from the commission to move forward and draft code amendments? Commissioners? Yes, I'll start by saying, again, I'm very sensitive to the inputs that we received from the neighborhood association and the concerns from the Forest Hills First Edition. It seemed like the comments were they're not necessarily opposed to it. They are concerned about the process. The letter we received from Luga was my interpretation that they were saying it didn't make sense, and that they were generally not in favor of moving forward. And then from Jan Castle, she brought up excellent comments about being concerned about the sustainability efforts and the progress we've made. So that's something that we'd have to take into consideration for approval. But also, like Vice Chair Pape was pointing out, in the current situation, I think it's taken even more important that, to maybe give some additional viability to struggling businesses in the COVID environment, that this is worth looking at, and not, downplaying any of the concerns that have been brought up. But my recommendation would be to move forward and look at drafting code amendments. Commissioners, comments?
I would agree. I think this is an important piece where we can assist and help our local businesses with an option for helping them, one, through the current situation, but as well as potentially through the winter months when people don't necessarily go out as much. But I would like to see what staff comes back with regarding somewhere between the 2 and 3 mark, with the addition of, or not exclusive to restaurants or eateries, but also including retail.
Vice Chair Pepe. Commissioner Stewart?
Yeah, I would agree with you both. I'm sorry. I thought you might have called me, but I may have spoken out of turn.
Oh, no, sorry. No, you're okay. Commissioner Summer?
I think this all sounds great. I think, yeah, I agree with everything that everyone said. Let's get to the next steps, see what, you know, the next versions of 2 or 3 look like, and see what that, how we can push forward. And I'm just all for helping local business right now and the current environment. And like Commissioner Pepe had said, that, you know, whether it's just for the short term via the COVID, but also long-term viability and helping them is, I think, the best path forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Beckett?
Yeah, I agree with all the previous comments. Just should do what the next step is.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Whitman. Commissioner Beckett, any comments?
I'm not clear of the question right now because our chairman's voice is not intelligible to me today.
Commissioner Beckett, may I speak louder if you can hear me? The question was, do you have a recommendation on moving forward and drafting code amendments? The bullet item number 1. Any feedback on that?
Mr. Heap, I need somebody else to explain it because the acoustics for me from your microphone just aren't working. So someone else needs to explain what they're asking you.
Commissioner Beckett, where are you at with the questions that are being asked that we're seeing in front of our screen right now?
Oh, okay. Let me get those up. Okay, I would want more discussion, although we've got it down to 2 options. So we've decided on option 2 or 3. I think we don't need to require new parking yet, and I don't think the vestibule should be an issue. So let's move forward with drafting code amendment having to do with options 2 and 3.
Right, thank you. Planner Fronstead, I think the commission is pretty much aligned on the recommendations to move forward. Very sensitive to the public input that we've got so far. So as we go through the public process, you know, really having staff report back on some of the issues and options we have to address concerns that have been raised would be important. But the recommendation is to move forward right now. So as Attorney Boone had mentioned, we're not really deciding either for or against this, but trying to give feedback on the scope and a recommendation to move forward. And so I think with that, we've kind of covered the goals. Is there anything else, Planner Fronstead, that you think the commission should give feedback on tonight, or should we conclude the work session for tonight?
No, I think that was very helpful. Yeah, thank you for your consideration and recommendations. We'll look into more of options 2 and 3 and the vestibules. I was a little unclear about adding retail to it. Is everyone in favor of potentially adding that to the scope?
Commissioners, comments on increasing the scope to retail?
I mean, would that include sorry. Would that include a work?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Would that include a working session with? I'm sorry. I'm just wondering if that would include a working session with retail owners around the community to see how they would feel about that, or is this just scope that would be added to the current draft amendments, just as sort of a blanket type of approach, adding square footage to business to help business?
Chair, if it's helpful, we've been talking on a couple different levels here. One in the near term with the the government's restrictions under the COVID-19 declaration. And we don't, of course, know how long that's going to go on. It could be a year, could be longer. We don't know. And then there's the longer term issue or the need that was identified last year before the pandemic even became visible or apparent to us, as Commissioner Patrick said. So, I mean, we might want to approach it on both levels and consider that, you know, whether it's retail or restaurant or some other commercial use, if under social distancing, they're required to spread out. I think what we're hearing is that we should do everything that we can within reason to facilitate that or to remove unnecessary regulatory barriers in the near term. But in the long term, we need to keep our eye on you know, on the community design standards and make sure that we're you know, having these structures. If they're going to be recurring, they're going to be set up seasonally. They need to meet some standard.
Thank you, Director Siegel.
I would say we initially do it only for the restaurants, not for the retail. Consider what it takes to move merchandise from retail into an outdoor setting. I doubt that they would want to permanently set retail goods out in a very exposed area like that. It's one thing with tables where they can clean them off and let them sit and nobody's gonna come in and run off with a table. So let's just do restaurants for right now.
Commissioners, other comments? My feedback would be similar to Commissioner Beckett's. You know, I don't think we want to preclude, you know, businesses, but if there's no businesses that are coming forward and kind of giving a reason to include it, then I think the focus should be on kind of solving the problems that restaurants have particularly raised. So, you know, if going forward, if there are requests to expand it to retail, I think the commission would be willing to, you know, listen to that and look at it. But in the absence of, you know, having a request right now, I think the focus should be on the restaurant usage. Commissioners, any other comments? None? So does that answer your remaining questions, Planner Frenstead?
Yes, it does. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the good
Thank you.
presentation. And thank you to Carol, Jan, and the Wallougan Neighborhood Association for all the public input that we received tonight. Thank you. All right, next on the agenda is other business. I didn't have any other business. So we'll move on to schedule review. Director Siegel, would you like to give us an update on the schedule?
Yeah, thank you. I'll bring the schedule up and we can look at it together. See if I can find it here anyway. Okay. Okay, so the schedule is, we've had to make some adjustments, obviously having missed 2 months worth of meetings. But overall, I'm pleased to say that we are on track for making it through the commissions and the city council's goals this year, at least initiating the work this year. So at your next meeting on the 22nd, we anticipate an update on several initiatives under the city council's housing goal. So we'll have an update from Senior Planner Olson on HB 2001 and 2003. He's been tracking those pretty closely, and the commission's been receiving updates on those. So we anticipate more of an update than a work session, but I think it'll be helpful in advance of the joint meeting that you'll have with the city council in July. And that date is tentatively July 21st. And we think that'll be an important milestone in terms of kind of taking a look at the direction that the state's going with the rulemaking and the model code, and looking at the draft work program and scope that we've prepared to work. One, to begin gathering the information that you'll need to really understand the impact of HB 2001, and then secondly, to provide a good base of information for the community involvement process that'll follow in 2021. So again, an update on the 22nd of June, a joint meeting with the City Council anticipated on the 21st of July regarding HB 2001. The other two items that are housing related that we'll be bringing to the Commission on the 22nd, two are, they're really, they're separate applications that will be coming before you as what we would refer to as quasi-judicial zoning and comprehensive plan amendments. One is for the Boones Ferry Road staging area site. This is about a 2-acre property on Boones Ferry Road that the City Council has identified as a potential future site for affordable housing. And so that'll be coming to the Commission probably later this year in the form of a development application. But we do want to brief you on kind of the background and go through the process ahead of that application so that you know what's coming, and any input that you might have for staff would be good to get at that point. Because again, it'll be an application that the city files and that the Planning Commission will then review and make a recommendation to City Council for a comprehensive plan and map amendments. The second application, again, this is just prospective update for the Planning Commission on the 22nd, is a little bit of background on the Merrillhurst Plan District, and this is an area where the property owner, the Sisters of the Holy Names, have approached the city and asked the city to initiate or to anticipate an application coming from the Sisters to rezone a portion of the Merrillhurst campus for affordable workforce housing. So again, it's a, I guess you could call it a private development application or a quasi-judicial development application for zone change and plan amendments that'll be coming to the Planning Commission later this year. But we thought it would be helpful to give you some background on that, and then staff would, of course, take any input that we might receive from you to the prospective applicant. So on the 22nd, those three housing related items, and I think that's it. We have, yeah, that's it on the 22nd. And then moving into July, we'll begin work on the annual Community Development Code amendments, leading off with the work session to go over the scope and the initial list of code amendments that the city's considering there. And then through the rest of the year, as you can see, it's a lot of work on housing. This proposal that you were discussing this evening on dining enclosures will be coming back to you for a public hearing, second meeting in July, tentatively. And then the flood hazard overlay code amendments that we had discussed. I thought we had discussed that with you earlier. That'll be coming to you in the form of a draft package of code amendments for a work session also in July before that goes to a public hearing later in the summer. So you can see the other items that are outlined there. We do have an update and a work session on the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan that is scheduled. At this point, it's looks like second meeting in July. And from there, we'll see what Ms. Slepian and the Sustainability Advisory Board have for us to discuss and kind of the next steps on that. So sorry for kind of a long-winded update, but it's been a while since we've met, and that's what we have on deck. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Director Siegel. Commissioners, any questions on the schedule for Director Siegel? None. Maybe one question just on our meeting approach. Is there any updates with the restrictions maybe relaxing, is there any more insight we got on maybe moving to regular meetings, or is still the status the same? For right now, we're going to do virtual meetings through Zoom video conferencing. Any updates you can share, Dr. Siegel?
Oh yeah, thank you. So at this point, we're still on virtual or video conferencing meetings through June. Likelihood is that we'll be back here doing this at least the first meeting in July. The city's reopening, or not reopening isn't the right word, but easing of restrictions. We're following the state plan for the phased plan for reopening of public assembly and businesses and everything else. And under that plan, each county must apply to the state to enter the next phase of reopening. And currently Clackamas County is in phase 1, which does allow for some smaller group gatherings, I believe up to 25 people, where social distancing is maintained. And we have not resumed in-person meetings for the city council or any of the boards and commissions, because we don't have the capacity within the council chambers to hold a meeting with up to 25 people and having everyone 6 feet apart. And generally, I think the council's not comfortable doing that anyway at this point. With the next phase of reopening or easing of restrictions, Clackamas County, each county has to meet certain criteria that the state has established. And currently, the county is not in a position where they can apply for phase 2. I think there are 5 or 6 different criteria, and there are a couple of those that they're not at the level of, I think it's contact tracing and following up on COVID cases that are diagnosed. There's some follow-up requirements that the county health department is responsible for monitoring. And so they're not even in a position yet where they can apply for phase 2. We anticipate the earliest that they might apply or that they could receive approval to move into phase 2 is the last week in June. So really only, I guess, a couple of weeks away. But even then, the city council would need to authorize, the city to move into the next phase and determine whether or not the city is ready to hold larger meetings. So basically what that means, if, once the local jurisdictions attain phase 2, or in our case, what we're calling part 2, it could allow for larger gatherings up to 50 people. But again, with the distancing requirements, we're not sure how that would work exactly. So anyway, a long way of saying nothing's going to change, at least for the next 1 or 2 meetings. And we should know more by the last week in June. And I'll certainly let you know.
Thank you, Director Seal. And then, is it my understanding, it's a question for Iris, that the next meeting we will change from Zoom back to the WebEx? Is that correct, or will stay on Zoom?
WebEx is my understanding.
Okay. So commissioners, just be aware that we'll need to make sure we're prepared for a WebEx session. Commissioners, any final comments on schedule? No, I think that's it. So thank you, commissioners and staff. That concludes our meeting tonight. So I'd like to adjourn at this time. Thanks for everybody for joining and all the great testimony we got. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.